Okay, so beyond vital record, so we're basically talking about everything else. I'm going to throw in a couple of case studies and one or two live searches, and hopefully it will be of some interest. So this first case study started a long time ago, probably before I was born, when here in Melbourne, Dr. Hans Goldman met my grandfather, Leo Kay, or originally Kaczynski, and they came to the conclusion that they must be cousins. But I don't know if they figured out exactly how they were cousins, because I still haven't been able to figure out exactly how they were cousins. But Hans's mother was Laura Goldman, and this is her entry from the German Gedenkbook, which you can find online. Does everyone have the handout? It lists all the web pages that I refer to, so and hopefully even in order. So searching for Hans's mother on the Gedenkbook brought us this page, which said that her maiden name was Kaczynski, the same surname as my grandfather had. And of course there's no death certificate for her on which you could find the name of her parents, because she perished in Treblinka. Okay, JRI Poland revealed the name of her parents and even had a link to a document where I could see the original. And that showed that her parents were Moritz Kaczynski and Charlotte Hausdorff. And there's Laura's name there. So we found the name of her father, but what can we tell about him? So I started looking, and the first thing I found was some burial records at familysearch.org. So this is basically a list of who's buried where in the Jewish cemetery in Katowice, same town that we were just looking at. And so the plots were purchased by Moritz Kaczynski, and one was his daughter and one was his wife. And there's what seems to be an empty plot there reserved for Moritz. But as far as I can tell, he was never buried there. So his burial is not recorded there, and his death isn't recorded there. So the birth, deaths and marriage records from Katowice are online, certainly up to the late 1920s, if not the 1930s. And because it came from the Prussian part of Poland, the records are not the same as the ones you may have been used to seeing through JRI Poland. So up until the end of World War I, they're in German, and after that they're the same style, but they're in Polish. So I did find the birth records of numerous sisters of Laura, and I even found a couple of death records, including the one, for the sister whose burial we just saw. But there was no trace of Moritz's death. So the question I had to try and solve was, when did he die? Where did he die? And the first trace I found of his death was at genealogyindexer.org. Now, that is a website put up by Logan Kleinworks, where he indexes thousands of directories, hundreds of YISCOR books, military hit lists, community histories, school records, all sorts of stuff. And I typed in Moritz Kaczynski. Did I do it with an I or a Y? I forget. I think I did it with a Y. And I searched, and lo and behold, up comes the Poland B'nai B'rith membership directory, indexed. And also, when I...
You're on the slide.
Oh, okay, you can't see it. How do I change that?
Just go to the search engine down the bottom.
Down the bottom, click on it.
No, do I have to minimise the slideshow?
Click on the web page.
So do you want to go into a website, do you, now?
Yeah. I've got the... I need to... Okay, let me end the slideshow for the moment. That'll do it. It's a bit brutal, but... Okay. So I've actually typed his name in quotes, and I come up with the B'nai B'rith membership directory for Poland. And if you actually bring down the documents, so this is the 1928 B'nai B'rith directory from the website. And if you go through it, you find the B'nai B'rith Lodge from Katowice, and then they have the list of their deceased members, and there he is. So this is the 1928 one where he's listed not as Moritz Kaczynski but as Kaczynski Moritz, so I didn't actually find it when I did that search with the double quotes. Genealogy Indexer has all sorts of stuff. For example, for Shanghai, it has the immigrant address book. It was published in 1939, and that's a very useful book to find people who went through Shanghai during the war. Okay, so we know that Moritz was deceased by 1928. There was a 1926 address book also on Genealogy Indexer, and that did not have a list of deceased members, but he also wasn't listed as a current member. So we know that he died probably before 1926. Okay, so Ancestry had a death certificate for someone of the same name who died in 1925. But they died in Berlin, which is not where I expected to find him, because he'd lived all of his life in Katowice. Here is that death certificate from Ancestry, and unfortunately, German death certificates after 1920 are not as useful as they were before 1920. So it doesn't mention the name of his wife, which would tell you that it was the right person. It doesn't mention any of his children. It doesn't mention his parents, which is the thing that I really wanted. It says that he was 79, which is probably about the right age for someone who fathered a child in 1873. But other than that, we've got no way of knowing whether this is really the person that we're after or not.
Does it say where he's buried? Is it in Berlin?
Well, presumably he's buried in Berlin.
Might be on the tombstone.
Well, yeah, I haven't taken that path yet.
Charlottenburg is a suburb of Berlin.
Sorry?
Charlottenburg is a suburb.
Yes, it's a suburb of Berlin. So it does say he was born in Sorau, which is the town where all the Kaczynskis come from. So it means, yes, he is part of my family. But we don't know if it's the one that we were looking for or just...
Sorau is called Zori today.
Yeah, but...
Did you look on Joe
I think I did, but the Weisensee Cemetery in Berlin has got a huge number of burials, and only a small number of them are in Joba. So it was time to start searching for newspaper references. Have we found the right Moritz Kaczynski? There's a website called Compact Memory, which has over 500 Jewish periodicals, mostly written in German. And I again searched, but we don't know if it's the one that we were looking for or just...
Zorro is called Zori today.
Yeah, but...
Did you look on Java?
I think I did, but the Weissensee Cemetery in Berlin has got a huge number of burials and only a small number of them are in Joba. So it was time to start searching for newspaper references. Have we found the right Moritz Kaczynski? There's a website called Compact Memory, which has over 500 Jewish periodicals, mostly written in German. And I again searched for Moritz Kaczynski, and it took me quite a while, but I eventually found a reference to his death. And it said Katowice at the age of 80, which disagrees with the death certificate, which said 79. At the age of 80 years has died the retired person Moritz Kaczynski, and he did all sorts of wonderful things in Katowice. Doesn't say where he died, doesn't give a date of his death. So we think we're on the right track because we now know that the person that the Moritz Kaczynski we're looking for died before the 16th of July 1925, which was the date of this publication. But we're still not 100% sure because it doesn't say that he died in Berlin and it doesn't say what date he died. Okay, so yet another website which has newspapers is called Europeana. I don't know how you pronounce that. European with an A on the end. And it has over 50 million items, including many newspapers. And I searched for Moritz Kaczynski and narrowed down the date range. And bingo, I found a death notice in, I think it was the Berlin Tageblatt, that's the Berlin daily paper. And I don't know if you can read it or not. I'm certainly struggling to read it on the screen here. It says on the 17th of June 1925, died in Berlin, Moritz Kaczynski, and the ad was submitted by the synagogue community of Katowice. So yes, we did find the right one, but we still don't know who his parents are. There is a problem with Sorrow in that the Jewish records have about a 10-year gap just when Moritz was born. So he was probably the descendant of one of my great-great-grandfather's cousins. And that's still an open question. Okay, the next newspaper website to mention is Exile Press. The URL was meant to be on the slide, but it's on your piece of paper. So that has 30 German language newspapers from the Hitler period and published outside of Germany. They include 8 newspapers from Shanghai, for example. Unfortunately, only fragmentary runs, so they don't have the complete run of most of the newspapers. But the first one I picked to look at was the Jewish community newsletter, Gemeindeblatt des Judentums Kultusgemeinde. And I'm flicking across to page 3, and here's an advertisement for the Immigranten address book that I mentioned earlier, that is now indexable on Genealogy Indexer. And then down the bottom of the page was an ad for my grandfather's cafe in Bublingwell Road, Shanghai. And that got me. Okay, more newspaper sites. We can never have too many newspapers. The Historical Jewish Press at the National Library of Israel, that has hundreds of newspapers from all around the world. There are, I think, 10 from Australia, including 2 Yiddish publications. And for those who've been asking, yes, you can search the Yiddish ones, but of course you have to type in the Hebrew letters of the word you're wanting to search for. That makes it well, not straightforward, but if you're determined enough, you can do that.
Do you have to join that library?
National Library, no, it's just a website. You just go there. No, that you don't log in, or you don't have to log in. You just search it. And I happened to search the Australian region for Eisfelder, and came up with another advertisement, but this time it's for my grandfather's cake shop in Chapel Street here in Melbourne. So that website is, I think, underused, and because it has many newspapers from all over the place. I think I'm not sure if it has much in the way of the Yiddish press of Poland, but there are certainly lots of Yiddish newspapers there.
Would you have got that page on National Archive?
Sorry?
Would you have got that page on National Archive?
I think so, yeah. I think that particular one, yeah, there is some overlap in the newspapers that Trove has, and the National Library of Israel, Historical Jewish Press. But I don't think Trove has the Yiddish newspapers.
No.
Yeah.
YIVO in America.
Sorry?
YIVO in America would have Yiddish press from Poland and Israel.
But have they got it online?
I don't know, but
Yeah.
they collect all that, and they're still collecting today.
Well, this website certainly has grown over the years. When I first looked at it, it didn't have any Australian papers.
Nothing to do with genealogy.
Yeah.
Is that address Patterson?
No, that's Louis' Continental Cakes.
But did that become Patterson?
No, they were the competition.
Oh, okay.
It was further down. It was 2 doors up from my grandfather's clockmaker shop.
What number was that?
Oh, 79.
Oh, okay, that was the other side of Union
Close to
Street.
Dan and I.
That's amazing.
Okay, so the next case study, a friend of mine was wanting to set up a Stolperstein for her husband's grandfather, and we weren't too certain exactly where the family lived. Was it Essen? Was it Bochum? Was it Wattenscheid? Well, the Gedenkbook says that he was residing in Wattenscheid when he was expelled to Poland. Strangely, not before Kristallnacht, but the following April. But that didn't give us an address. So, address books. So, the difference between a business directory and an address book is, well, not really much. They're pretty much the same thing. And I figured out that you can find address books for pretty much any town in Germany, or at least any significant sized town, using a URL like that. And for Wattenscheid, he came up with this page, which lists about a dozen address books from various years. Unfortunately, not all of them seem to be online. The 1939 one was, but we didn't find Mr. Spiegel there in 1939 because he'd been expelled to Poland. 1935 and 1930, it looks like the address books exist, but they're not online. But 1925, we got lucky. That one is online, and I was able to go through it, not a page at a time, fortunately, but I got to page 537 by jumping forwards, jumping back. Most of these address books are arranged in, they have two sections. They have a sort of like a yellow pages organised by business type, and then they have two sections. One is organised by address, in other words, the streets are in alphabetical order, and then the other section is by alphabetical order by surname. So in this case, we didn't know what his address was, so we had to use the section alphabetical by surname, and there we found Spiegel, and there he is. So at Hochstrasse number 87, there's a Moses Spiegel, and that was the person we were searching for. So at least now we've got a basis of going to the people in Bochum who look after the Stolpersteiner in Wattenscheid and saying to them, well, he lived at that address in 1925, can you follow him from there?
And the initials KFM stand for Kaufmann.
Yes, yeah, he was a merchant, which doesn't really mean very much.
No.
Okay, while I was preparing this talk, I stumbled across an address book for Bamberg from 1841, which was a significant year for me because that was the year my great-great-grandfather died in Bamberg. And so, of course, I looked for the address where the family lived, and he wasn't there, but his father-in-law was named as the owner of the building. But that particular website is worth mentioning, the Munich Digitization Centre, MDZ. And they have digitised over 3 million manuscripts, prints, music, maps, photographs, newspapers and magazines. So I typed in my grandfather's name. I'm sorry, not grandfather, great-great-grandfather, who died in 1841. And I came up with this book, which seems to be, it's a register of, it's a list of businesses registered in Bamberg, starting from 1825, going through to 1845. And believe it or not, great-great-grandfather, who died at the age of 33, gets a mention. And not only does he get a mention, so it says what date the business was registered, and the name of the firm, which was just his own name, but also in 1844, 3 years after he passed away, his widow's second husband was registered as owning the business J. Eisfelder Rosenberg. Should have been S, I guess, but maybe they spelt it wrong. And so that was I was pretty surprised to find that, I can tell you. And then earlier in the book, way back in the early pages, number 40 on the register was my great-great-great-grandfather. And even more surprising that I had to look it up in a dictionary. Procurer sort of means an attorney. So in other words, someone who's delegated to act on behalf of the principal. His wife, my great-great-great-grandmother. And so they got a mention in this business directory published 180 years ago.
And what town is that?
That's in Bamberg. Okay, so the handout lists a number of other websites because I figured I didn't really have time to go into all of the sites. And one thing I was going to talk about was residency cards. A lot of places, especially in Germany, had a system of registering residents, and there was a card system. And so when you moved into a place, that was noted on your card. The city of Posen has its residency cards online. And if we go way back to Moritz Kaczynski. I found one of his daughters lived for a time in Posen, and I found the residency card for her husband, her and their child. And so that was, I think, around the time of World War One. So that card system seemed to stop being used sometime in the 1920s, at least in those places. The URL for that is not on your handout because that was an afterthought. If I'd had another few days to prepare this talk, I might have put that in as well. But those residency cards are fantastic sources of information because they give you a snapshot of the entire family, together with dates of birth and places of birth.
Is that from, what image is that?
The one in particular, what I found was from the city of Posen. So they moved from Katowice. The city of Danzig, now called Gdansk, also has its residency cards online. And I've found family living there in the 1840s on those residency cards, right up until World War One. Okay, so...
Rodney, just a question on that last one.
Yeah.
How do you translate Alter von 80 Jahren?
In the age of 80 years.
Yes, you could, but it sometimes can mean in his 80th year.
His 80th year.
Which means he could have just been 79 and not yet 80.
No, you're right.
Yeah, let me see. I can't read it on that screen. It's too small. Well, it says, in the age of 80 years. I wouldn't read that as being in the 80th year. I'd read it in the age of 80 years. My German is not very
I found
strong.
sometimes that's the meaning of it,
Yeah.
and it results in 1 year differences between people's birth year. People use the wrong, make a mistake. I mean, it's just a usage thing.
Well, I recently read that in Korea, until a few days ago, they had a different way of you were, I think, 1 year old when you were born, because you're in your first year, and so that does, it could be out by 1 year, but who knows? Anyway, that brings us to the end of my talk, unless there are
Yeah, can I make a note on
questions.
genealogy index?